So to paint a good landscape, all you gotta do is find a good scene and then paint it, right? Wrong. You don't. At least I don't. I did used to think that way, but then I developed a process that helped me make more sense of painting landscapes. So let's dive into my process, which actually starts outside painting in plein air. So right now I'm not exactly 100% sure of my composition. Like I have a few ideas that I sketched out. So I'm gonna do them on my little sketch pad and see which ones I like and then maybe do a bigger one. There's a lot of cool elements here. And so at the very least, I just wanna get a study and get some of those in. So then when I go back to the studio, I have that information to do more paintings if I want to. Now, if you're just starting out painting, don't fall into the trap that I did in thinking that the painters that you admire just go out and paint great paintings right there on the spot the first time, every time. They don't. At least most of the time they don't. There's a lot more effort and thought and studies and failures and choices being made to get to those good paintings. So a few things that I like about this scene. One, I like this red building here. I like the idea of pushing this red against the green because those are complement colors. I like how it's in the distance and you can kind of follow this shoreline up to it. We also have these nice bushes that overlap and can display a lot of distance. I also like this boat, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to make that the focal point or the red building the focal point. So I actually did a study of just the boat, so I had that information. So the light was changing pretty quickly, and there were a few things that I wanted to capture here, so I quickly did a couple studies in my painting sketchbook with oils on craft paper. Now, on a side note, I used to really hate doing small little paintings. I'd see people doing them, and I tried doing them, and they would never work. I felt like I had too much paint for that small of an area. But as I got better, and as I understood what really made a painting work and what to look for, the more and more I wanted to do these small studies, because you can figure out so much in these little studies, and you can save yourself a lot of time in trying to figure those out on a big painting. I really recommend painting outside when you can. Even if you can't, if you're taking photos, take mental or verbal notes over a video of what you're seeing with your eyes, because you're going to take in a lot more. You're gonna be able to see more into the shadows. You're also going to experience the scene differently in person. If you've ever had the experience of standing in front of a scene that was just amazing and you take a photo of it, and then later when you're back home, you look at the photo and you're like, this doesn't seem as interesting as when I was there. So many times I will go out and paint a plein air painting and then take a photograph of the scene to use as a reference later, and I'll come back and I'll look at just the reference photo. I'll be like, wow, I can't believe I decided to paint that scene. Like, looking at the photo, there's not that much that's interesting to me. So always be observing even if you're not painting. So now I head back into the studio with my reference photos, my study, and my memory and experience of being there. And I set my studio up to get working again. And I actually first do a couple pencil thumbnail value studies to figure out the composition of the big values. I'm trying to find the composition and organize it in just 3 values: a dark, a mid-tone, and a light. I know if I can create a good composition with just those 3 values, I got a good solid structure to build a painting off of. So once I have that, I actually sit down and do another small little study in my sketchbook. And I'm doing this to test things out, figure out what colors to use, see if my composition really is going to work. And when I'm choosing those colors, making sure they're in the right values to adhere to the value compositional map that I sketched out earlier. All right, quick side note, if you struggle with color mixing, I'm not gonna get into this video because I offered the color mixing video for my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. If you wanna check that out, there's a link to it in the description of this video. So this is my little study that I did. It's only 3 by 4 inches. And some of the key things that I liked about it were, one, I added these rocks as kind of like a buffer to keep your eye from shooting off down to the corner of the scene there. And these rocks lead you up, to the bush, which leads you up to the building, and then over to the focal point, which I actually ended up having as the boat here. And then this reflection brings you back down to where you started. I like the color scheme. I like the red next to the green. I like how this gets warmer as you get closer to shore and you can see more into the water to the ground at the bottom. I liked this shadow in the water here and how certain little areas of dappled light could come into play in the shadow. And then the blue of the reflected light from the sky in the water to indicate like waves or ripples in the water. So I like my study and I'm like, all right, I'm ready to jump into this and do a 16 by 20 painting. So I jump on in and start painting. I block things out, making sure I'm getting the right colors and values according to my study, but I got a few hours in and I just wasn't liking what I was seeing. So when that happens, I have a checklist of things that I go through to see what is wrong with my painting and diagnose the problem. And it's nothing fancy. It's the painting fundamentals. It's composition, drawing, values, colors, and edges. So this is how far I got before I stopped. And one of the first things I always check is composition. I feel like one of the most common mistakes people make with their composition, me included, is making things too similar in size. Like I feel like I made this building kind of the same height as this bush here, which is also similar in height to this bush here. Just these three are like just taking up, I feel like, the same amount of space. I mean, it's good that I have this taking up a lot of space, but then also again, like this boat is kind of the same height. So I just feel like it's like same height, you know, same height. I also felt like I didn't know what I was doing in all this water. I kind of got lost and felt like I didn't have a good plan. I also feel like I have too many areas of highly saturated color. Like this is a pretty vibrant saturated color. So is the water here, so is this. You know, this blue in here is pretty saturated. So there was enough things about this that were bothering me that I just felt like it wasn't a good idea to continue with the painting. And this is part of the process. You know, no matter how many studies and things you do, like it can still go wrong at this stage. And it's okay to walk away from a painting. Don't be a slave to a painting thinking like, oh, I have to finish it because I started. It's like, no, move on to another one. You know, set it aside. Who knows? Maybe with a fresh mind and you come back to it, you'll have like an idea of what to do with it and how to fix the mistakes. And now the most important thing that you need to do when a painting doesn't go well is get back out there and keep painting, which is what I did. So this time I went to a local marina and I really liked this scene here. I liked how these buildings were a backdrop to these trees and this cove with boats and the way it was all backlit. I just had a strong feeling that this could make a good painting. And I actually felt so good about this scene and composition that I didn't do a little study in my sketchbook. I just went straight to a 9x12 linen panel. And I was pretty happy with how this one turned out. Was it perfect? No, but I felt like I had gotten enough information that along with my photos, I was pretty sure there was a big painting here. But the weather was so nice this past week that I was like, I want to go out and paint somewhere else again. So one of the first things I do is I come out with my sketch pad. I don't even bring my backpack of paints and everything out. And I just walk around and look for a composition. And I used to do this with my phone, my camera, and take pictures and try and crop it. But I realized that limited me, that it didn't free my mind to change things. Like I felt locked in to you know, what was there and where everything was. And I found that doing the sketches made it a lot easier to find a good composition. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I went to a place that I've actually painted before. And honestly, this is a pretty big advantage, I feel like, because like I know how the light's gonna be, I'm familiar with it, I know where to look for good spots, I know where to kind of place myself for good compositions. And I really like this scene right here. And again, here, I just went straight to a 9x12 panel because I was pretty confident in the scene. And when I do these 9x12s, I feel like I have more opportunity to kind of capture more information about the scene than I would a little sketch. And one of the great things about painting on site is that you can incorporate so many things that are around you that you probably wouldn't if you were just working from a photograph because your view is locked off. Like for this one, it wasn't in my field of view of the scene, but right next to me down below, the water was very clear, very green, warm, with like a lot of light hitting it. It was just very interesting. So I incorporated that into the painting. And I liked how this painting turned out, and I feel like I will revisit it and do some sketches to figure out the best way to go about doing it. But at the moment, I really wanted to get back to that marina scene. I felt like that still had a lot of potential. So I actually went back to the drawing board, literally, and figured out my 3-value sketch. So what I did was I took the elements of the scene and grouped them into one of 3 values. There's the dark value, there's the mid-tone, and then there's the highlight. And I want to make sure that my focal point is the only area where the brightest bright meets the darkest dark. And you can see that's the only place where this happens. So when I paint this and I put color and everything in, I need to make sure that when I squint my eyes and get rid of detail, that these trees and the reflection of them in the buildings all are grouped into a darker value. And the water here and the buildings are a mid-tone, and this boat and the sky are the lightest. So now, even though I did the 9x12 on site of this one, I actually went back to the sketchbook. I was like, all right, now that I have a new composition and I got a better feel for the scene, I got a photo reference, I can take some more time, I want to do a little 3x4" study again. And that's what I did. And I found it very helpful to figure out the questions that I still had on the scene. All right, so on the left we have the 9x12 study, and over here is the 3x4" study. Now I know this one seems like a lot simpler and messier, but there's a lot of questions being answered here. One is I feel like I communicated more depth with these trees back here and just pushed the purple a little more, cooled things down, desaturated them, and just set them further in the background. Also, just the shapes of these trees. I knew going into this a pitfall of doing these trees was making them all kind of like the same shape. You just have this repetition of these, like mounds of trees, which I kind of did get caught up into. And I knew I needed to group them into different shaped groups. Like I kind of have these two here that are in a group together. I guess you could throw that little guy in there too. And then there's, this long shape down here. And that's just going to look a lot better than just having the same kind of repeated shape over and over. Also placed another boat here, thought that would help the composition. Again, pushed the cooler color and the buildings in the back, a little more purple in the water. And just after doing this, I felt a lot more comfortable about going into the larger painting. Now I start this 16x20 painting, just worrying about values by drawing out the scene and blocking out the big value shapes with a wash of brown paint. I really want to establish what's dark and what's light on a big, broad scale to keep me on track. And then I go through and try and block out all the major elements with flat color. My main goal here is to get the whole canvas covered with paint as soon as possible. So I'm able to compare everything. Like I need the color and value of the water to figure out the color and value of the trees, to figure out the color and value of the buildings. I need the color and value of the buildings to figure out the color and value of the water. So I'm not worried about getting things perfect right now. Like I know I'm going to be adjusting as I go, but I need to get something on there. You don't want to get caught up in one little section and trying to paint one set of trees or whatever perfectly to completion, because you're losing perspective of the whole scene. Now, atmospheric perspective is a huge element of the scene. It's one of the reasons I wanted to paint it. An atmospheric perspective is as things get further away from you, certain colors drop out, first yellows, then reds, and you're left with blues. Things are also going to get less saturated in color, and also values are going to get closer together. So the shadow and light side of a tree that's close to you are going to have more contrast. The dark's going to seem darker and the light's going to seem lighter. That same tree, a mile away, that light and shadow on the tree are going to seem closer together in value. So I'm thinking about that as I'm painting these trees that bend along the shore away from me. Now don't skip a step with this. I feel like a lot of people will go straight to blue. They'll take whatever color they have, and when it gets further away, they'll just immediately make it blue. Don't forget about the step of taking out the yellow and replacing it with red. That's what I did with these trees back here. I kind of shifted areas that were more of like a yellowish green to more of a reddish green. It's kind of tricky, and it takes time to like get the right one because you don't want it to be like too warm of a reddish green, but keep an eye out for that, of taking out yellow and introducing a little more red. Now again, after a few hours of painting, I stop and assess what's going on and I acknowledge the things that are bothering me about the scene. And once again, I go through my checklist of fundamentals. And for this one, once I figured out those problems, I actually tested out making the changes in Photoshop. You know, this is pretty useful to see what your changes will look like before you go in and make them. So I have my Photoshopped one over here. And I feel like the main thing I did was I made these trees taller and take up more space and be a bigger player in the scene. I just felt like they weren't big enough or tall enough and playing a big a part in the scene as I wanted them to. I kind of had the buildings competing with them a little too much. And also, I feel like they're just too similar in size to the building. You know, I have the buildings taking up around this much space and the trees are the same. I also darkened the shadow in the water here to make the boat stand out more and to really group this shadow and reflection in the water along with the trees, like our value map at the beginning. Felt like the grass over here was too light and not really playing into being a dark value with these trees in the water, so I darkened that up a little bit. Now I also added a boat here for a couple reasons. One, I just felt like this was too long and hard of a line to go right off the page. Whenever you have a line like that, like a really strong line that goes for a long time on your canvas and just goes straight off, look for a way to break it up. Like I probably could have like taken some grass here and just, you know, brought it up a little bit to just break up that harsh line shooting you off the page. But I was like, oh, what if I put a boat there and then that boat could also be pointing you to the focal point? And I really liked adding that in right there. So once I know the changes I need to make, I actually take a palette knife and scrape down the areas that I know I need to repaint. You know, just taking a little bit of that paint off is gonna make it easier to, you know, repaint things back in, and you're not gonna have a ton of buildup of paint and really fight in the paint. And while I'm painting and adding details and adjusting things, I'm never forgetting what I started with, which was my little 3-value compositional sketch. You know, I wanna make sure I don't add too many highlights in these trees that it bumps them out of the darkest value and into the mid-tone. I don't wanna make the sky reflected in the water too bright that it makes it a bright value and competes with the bright boat. All right, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to see what I am painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.